Bill O'Donnell, and welcome to another program on spirituality. I'm excited to introduce my next guest, Father David Phillipson, who was recently ordained just last year at St. Francis Cathedral for the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. So welcome, Father David.
Thank you, Bill.
The Holy Spirit has brought us together any number of times, and I said, well, Father, maybe you ought to come and share a little of this. And I like to do it in terms of getting that insight, because you've been a priest for a year, and I'm sure your life has changed dramatically from being a seminarian and when you grew up. But I want you to remember some of that and share it with us, and possibly some young men out there may be inspired by what you have to tell them. So welcome to Spirituality TV.
Thank you. You know, I've bumped into you so many times, and you've been trying to get me here for so long. I figured I had to concede, to your request. So I'm glad to be here, though, and see, what the Holy Spirit might have in store for us and for anyone who is watching.
Well, that's the idea. We have a great opportunity here because people could just be channel surfing, spot and take a moment, particularly those who don't know anything about Catholicism, or possibly even more importantly, former Catholics who left in a huff or before they even knew what they left behind, and so get a chance to share with them as opposed to those who've just, are in the church already. So by way of starting, tell us a little about your childhood, where you grew up, and how you ended up becoming a priest. Well,
first of all, those who left the church, well, that was certainly me, and that was my childhood. I had been given the sacraments in a normal course, being confirmed by 8th grade. But the faith really wasn't stressed very much at home. And so I lived in New Jersey, was raised there in Monmouth County, and still can remember the church where I was baptized and confirmed. But about the 9th grade, my brother, who was older brother and a Maoist at the time, had convinced me that going to church was a waste of time. And I saw this as a golden opportunity to have more free time. So when I thought that, here my older brother, was basically allowing me not to go to church, I jumped on the opportunity and saw fit to maybe work a little extra hours. So I think I might have made another $14 a day, by not going to church on Sunday.
How old were you at this time?
I was in 9th grade. Oh. Yeah.
So you went to parochial grammar school?
I went to public school, and then Catholic high school, Christian Brothers Academy in Lincroft, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm. So you were trained by the brothers. What was that experience like after coming from a public school to go into a Catholic high school?
It was a bit of an adjustment, just leaving friends behind and that kind of thing. But really, after a while, I made a lot of friends, and it was a very good school. It was certainly had the reputation of being one of the best schools in New Jersey. The Catholicism there, though, wasn't maybe as strong as I would have wanted it looking back. There was a lot of things that, insofar as the Catholic Church is concerned, that, was probably lacking then.
What year did you graduate from high school?
In 76.
Okay, so Vatican II had well underway. Some of the changes. How did it change the brothers?
Well, I don't really know what the brothers kind of went through themselves. I kind of have only a vague recollection as to how the church in general was changed, but specifically the brothers. I was there, in the mid-70s. My brother had been there earlier, so. They were still, most of them were still wearing habits, even in the 70s, which I think might have been a little unusual.
Did that make an impression upon you either way, or were you obviously if you stopped going to church, you weren't obviously thinking about your spirituality consciously?
Right, I had, by the time 9th grade rolled around, leaving the church, the faith really had not meant much to me at the time, so I didn't think I was really leaving anything. In fact, I remember thinking of the church as being something that was merely concerned with external ritual. and didn't have anything for me insofar as the spirit was concerned, or the inner man. And there was nothing really at the school that made me think otherwise. But something did happen at the school, kind of indirectly to it. I was doing a report on Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, part of an English course, and I was surfing the card catalog at the time. There wasn't really a computer really to surf at the time. So I'm going through a bibliography on Brave New World, and I discovered a book called Doors of Perception. And
I read that book.
That opened my mind to another different world. And that really began a whole process of interest in spirituality. But it wasn't a spirituality that was really connected with the church, obviously.
Directly, yeah. But this is a common experience around those times. I think that was the psychedelic sort of generation, the rest of it. And that'll be something I hope we can get into a little bit, if not here, then another time, but to talk about how that did influence your spirituality, because I pick it up from you that you now have a well-developed sense of spirituality. I literally went to confession to him a few minutes before we did this, and I wanted to receive the sacraments from you to have a sense of who you are as a priest. But go on with your progress and how that made a difference or an impact on you.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we don't have. I would say, you know, normally when people ask me my story, I go, "How much time do you have?" But we don't have all that time. Okay. So, well, that led to the reading of Carlos Castaneda. I don't know if you're familiar with.
Very much so. Yeah.
And
the
actually,
teachings of Don Juan.
Yeah, exactly.
Journey to Ixtlan, and off we go.
Yeah, and so I went.
Blue yonder.
And so I went. In fact, I hate to say this, but in some ways, it's because of Carlos Castaneda that I'm here. I developed I had a love affair, if you will, with the Southwest from reading those books. And if I would have hopped in a car, and if I knew Don Juan's address, I was ready to find him. I was ready to sell all, so to speak, and seek out the master. Of course, I believed the books to be nonfiction at the time, even though I've come to think of them as purely fiction.
Yeah. And just last week, I think one of his wives actually just wrote a book that probably will add to some of that, but that's another story.
Right, right. So those books became my Bible, and I must have read them, or some of them 6 times or something. You know, I was meditating on the word of Don Juan. And then when I kind of realized that it didn't seem likely that I was going to head out to the Southwest, at least just yet, I started to develop spiritually within the means at my disposal, and I started reading anything that I could get my hands on related to the Eastern religions of Hinduism, and then eventually Buddhism. So practicing TM, yoga, pranayama. I started a regular practice of meditation back in high school, which in a sense I haven't stopped. It's just the form has changed. But in terms of...
And the cosmology is different, no doubt.
Yeah, certainly the cosmology is different.
How would you contrast the two cosmologies? Because I don't think enough is really discussed on that level. Because really, as you know, the action is below and above the surface on the church. If you just look on the surface, you're going to miss the bigger part of the picture.
Yeah. To me, the fundamental difference is the personalism of Christianity. Mm-hmm. In fact, I don't know if most people know that we owe the Christian church to the whole notion of person. And that is really sorely lacking in the Eastern religions. In fact, you could say they're almost apersonalistic.
Yeah.
So you have a kind of a amorphous notion of nirvana, for instance, right, or something like that. And so Christianity really enables the person to develop because it is engaged intimately in a loving relationship with a personal Father.
Right. For me, and I bet you were the same, I realized when I was in my Hindu phase that I was a yan, that I was trying to come to God through my intellect, and I was just smart enough to know I wasn't going to make it. So I made a conscious decision to become a bhakti, which is heart-centered and devotional, but it was through that that my mantra was changed to the highest commandment, which then brought me right in, because there's no greater deity focus than Jesus from that heart-centeredness. So anyhow, we have some things in common here, I have a feeling.
Obviously, yeah, you might have even been in it a little more than I did. I was just kind of more or less doing the practical side. I wasn't reading a whole lot on the theoretical side of Hinduism, but
yeah, I was in an ashram in Oakland with
I think I think you were probably more developed than I was.
Just a little older, that's all.
But I had the opportunity, a really golden opportunity to study Buddhism in India. Oh. It was like getting it from the source itself. And I hadn't really known too much about Buddhism at the time, but I took the opportunity and delved right into it. Again, focusing in on meditation, vipassana, Zen, that kind of thing. And it was the kind of collapse of that whole way of being that led me back into Christianity. So when it wasn't working as the way that I wanted it to work, when I came back to the United States, I went through a considerable reverse culture shock. I had found a kind of home in India, and the readjustment back into the United States was difficult because there were no, at that time, very little support systems within Buddhism. And I was going back to my old high school. This is how the high school kind of figured in again, because I wanted to meet a priest who had gone away to Western Samoa. He was a Maryknoll, and I wanted to touch base with him and talk about what it was like for him to come back from the third world. And he didn't have time for me, so he handed me off to the assistant principal at that time, Brother Gabe Healy, who I'd never met before. And I started the conversation by saying, I want to go back into a Buddhist monastery. And he said, you don't need to do that. And he gave me some books, and after a 3-hour conversation, I came home that day. I started reading books by Basil Pennington on centering prayer, and that was if you will, the day and the hour in which I had a conversion to faith, the Christian faith, because I realized that that's what I was missing in the journey, that I was trying to do it by myself apart from God, who promised to save us.
Talk a little bit more about that, Father, because I think you're right on the point where a lot of people don't realize what's in it for them by investigating that, about the Christian path.
Yeah, well, the Christian path again is the path in which there is the fullness of truth. But also, I wasn't at that time looking for truth. I was looking again for God, and the Christian path, if you will, it really enables one to discover who God truly is, because all the other paths really don't lead to, if you will, his center, which is a person, a divine person. And still desiring that, I shifted, if you will, my desire to enter into a Buddhist monastery to the desire to enter into a Catholic monastery. And I eventually was led to the Carthusians, where on my first retreat, through the grace of God, despite my own tendencies, God gave me that experience that I had always been looking for ever since high school, experience of himself. And from that point on, it's like it was no longer merely a matter of believing in something that I wasn't sure about. God had given me the experience of himself that I had been looking for, and from that point on, my life had changed.
And you're talking about Jesus, right?
Yes, I'm talking about, it's a Trinitarian experience.
Right.
It's Jesus working, but certainly the Holy Spirit there operative and lifting, if you will, me right up to the Father.
Yeah, that's a fabulous distinction. I'm glad you made that. So here we are. You've had this extensive background. At what point you went to college? I assume at some point in there, before or after this experience.
This would be before.
Yeah.
The experience happened after about a year or two after I graduated from college.
So what happened in the Carthusians, and how did the Spirit move you there, and what happened afterwards?
Well, I continued to discern a monastic vocation over a number of years. I then started studying philosophy at Fordham as a way of preparing to enter into the Carthusians, and in doing so, I encountered Bernard Lonergan, his book Insight, which again kind of radically changed my life. I felt I had done more traveling reading Insight than I had in my travels throughout the world, especially even into India.
Would you recommend it to people in the searching path today?
Yes, most certainly. Even though I found it to be an extremely difficult book, and that's why I lost all my hair, because I was pulling my hair out trying to understand it. I hadn't been used to getting the dictionary out every paragraph in order to look up this, that word, but it's a profoundly developed book, and certainly transformed my life, because it allowed me to exercise my intellect in the spiritual path, which before I had thought was inimical to it. And now I could see how I could integrate faith and reason. Whereas before I was kind of living the typical Catholic schizophrenic life, where the faith was one thing and reason or science was another, and never the twain would meet. But Bernard Lonergan enabled me to integrate and to feel at home in a world which maybe doesn't feel so at home with God.
Okay, so you were with the Carthusians, and then after how long did you leave there?
Well,
or you didn't actually make permanent vows or that sort of thing?
No, I had finally entered after about 11 or so years of discerning that vocation, and then within 6 months to the day, I entered on our feast of St. Therese, and then left on April Fool's Day. But exactly 6 months later, and I eventually came to think of myself as a fool for leaving, but God had other plans. And when I thought God didn't want me, I thought the whole vocation thing was through. I thought I was going to get married, and I was happy about this, and I was going to put the whole religious thing behind me once and for all, until I made another retreat at a nearby monastery in the Bronx, Corpus Christi Monastery, a group of cloistered Dominican nuns. And there happened to be a priest who was teaching at Fordham from Oxford, giving the Holy Week services. And Holy Thursday, he preached on Jesus and what he did for us at the Last Supper. And to my own surprise, the whole vocation thing came crashing back in. And then I was at a real loss, because I thought God was through with me, and I was more or less through with God, even though I was still going to church and keeping my faith and so forth. But I thought the whole vocation thing was behind me. And then I found these desires again to offer my life in prayer and sacrifice, and I didn't know what to do. So I asked one of the sisters, and she put me in contact with a spiritual director who then introduced me to other things that once again changed my life profoundly, and then entering the seminary and the priesthood.
What seminary did you enter?
Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Emmitsburg, Maryland.
So you went to seminary without a diocese in mind, or how did that come about? How did you end up here at the Santa Fe Archdiocese?
Right. Well, I had been coming out to the Southwest a number of times through Fordham University. I was running a program that we called Global Outreach, basically a volunteer service program for the students, and I developed a program at the Navajo Reservation, and I'd also come out to just visit or vacation in the Southwest before, so I knew that I loved it out here, and I was coming out here again on vacation. I started to head south of Albuquerque, where I never traveled in New Mexico before. I was heading to a Trappist friend in Arizona just to stay with him, and then I was going to come around again to Albuquerque and fly back. And the first stop that I make in Socorro, I noticed this beautiful Pueblo church to my right, on the corner of my eye. And not being from around here, to me a Pueblo church, was an eye catcher. So I realized I hadn't gone to Mass. There was Mass in a couple of hours, so I made a quick trip to Magdalena. Then I came back from Mass, and at that time, Father, he wasn't a priest at that time, but Father Leo Paget was giving a homily. And he said he was from Holy Apostles Seminary, and that was a seminary that I was interested in. So I spoke with him, and then he suggested for my spiritual journey that I contact a wise priest named Father John Carney, who happened to be the vocation director. Now, I don't think he told me that. And so after a little while, I was in the process of looking for a diocese at that time. I hadn't really thought about New Mexico. But after speaking with Father Carney for 2 minutes, he invited me to consider studying for the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. And over the course of a few months of prayer and reflection, I eventually decided to go that way, and then entered the seminary under the sponsorship of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe.
All right. So what was your seminary experience like for you?
Wonderful. Certainly a high point in my life, and also very transforming. I thought seminary was kind of be more or less like graduate school. I had been in graduate school, and I thought basically I was going to learn a number of new things, and certainly I did. My mind again was renewed, as St. Paul says. I came to understand first and foremost that theology is based on revelation, not on reason. That was a major and new insight for me. But even more important than that was the overall transformation that took place. Basically, seminary aims to train and to form, in some cases reform, and the intellect, the spiritual life, the pastoral gifts that one may have, and the human element of the person. And certainly this Mount St. Mary's did all that for me, or at least I thought so, because I felt myself to be transformed in ways that I never imagined even coming in. So it was like a father-making machine, not machine in a mechanical way, but in a way that I really felt developed and formed to become a priest.
That's fabulous. What advice would you have for men who have gone through any or parts of what you've gone through? How would you encourage them to take it farther within themselves if they're stalled or they haven't really gotten the call yet?
Well, I would say first to get a spiritual director, have someone to speak to, preferably a priest, who would be able to identify if it's there a possible priestly vocation or even a religious vocation. And there was a priest when I was living in New York who said this, that if anybody thinks that they might have a vocation to the priesthood, to at least give seminary a try. Preferably a good seminary, a seminary that's faithful to the magisterium. And I would agree that within 1 year's time, a person would know whether they were being called to the priesthood. Because I found, even within the first few weeks of being in seminary, that God was just leading me through, showing me with lights and consolation that this is truly where God wanted me to be. And I think that any man that's coming into the seminary would know, certainly within a year's time, whether he felt called or not.
All right, take us through. We've only got a few minutes. Now you've graduated from seminary and you're about ready to be ordained in your ordination process. What happened to you from that time, from entry to graduation in seminary? How would you describe that experience to someone?
You mean after seminary?
Yeah.
Again, I didn't know exactly what to expect from the ordination, but I happened to receive another tremendous grace during the ordination itself. I experienced God's transforming grace, even at the ordination, so that I knew in some ways inexplicable that I was a changed person after that I had been given not only a power, but that my own person was being modified and formed again to be another Christ, in persona Christi, to act in the person of Christ. And just recently I was given again that awareness that that when I'm celebrating the sacraments, it's really Christ in me that is working. And I was able to see myself in relation to him, that it was truly he that was working through my hands and through my voice.
And you mean that literally too, don't you?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just a metaphor, it's
no,
real.
it's real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what happens for you at that moment, for instance, when you lay your hands over that bread and wine? What is your experience?
Well, it's an experience of faith and mystery. It's an experience of profound humility, because of course the senses don't give any clues, to what's going on. So one is, if you will, forced in that very humble posture of accepting with the intellect and the will what the senses do not perceive. And so I am, if you will, so close to mystery himself. And it's an awesome experience, but it's also a very humbling experience.
Mm-hmm. And your relationship with people now, how has that changed?
Yeah, I didn't expect it, but I found the parish to be a place of nurturing that vocation, which was given, through the imposition of hands by the bishop, but then now developed through the people themselves. That is, their acceptance of my ordination really enabled me to exercise the ministry of the priesthood. Their acceptance of my ministry allowed me then to develop it and develop in that grace of ordination. So they've been very supportive, and I have felt that again, despite myself, that I've been able to do the Lord's work in wondrous ways in people's lives.
Well, that's fabulous. I have to end it here, unfortunately. I had the honor and privilege of being at your ordination. I didn't meet you at that time, I don't think, but it was a great experience. So I want to thank you for coming in and sharing some of that. And I would encourage you, if anything Father David said was of any value to you in your life, to pursue that, to go see him. He's currently Our Lady of Fatima, but by the time you see it, he may be at another post. As is the case with new priests, they do get around. So, but we hope that this show has been of some value to you in your spiritual life. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to call us, and we'll try and direct you if you can't find any resources where you are. So again, thanks for coming. I hope you'll come back and share some more.
Sure.
All right, on behalf of everybody here at Spirituality TV, I'm Bill O'Donnell. Thanks for viewing, and stay tuned next week for another program on spirituality.